Ever wondered how Broadcom and Qualcomm, two leading semiconductor companies in the US, stack up against each other financially? Well, you're in for a treat. Broadcom and Qualcomm have been at the forefront of semiconductor technology for years, shaping the way we interact with technology on a daily basis. Their financial performance, however, tells a more nuanced story. In this video, we'll be taking a deep dive into the financials of these two tech giants. We'll be comparing their revenue growth, profitability, balance sheet strength, operational efficiency, and much more. We'll also take a look at their business models to understand where their revenue comes from and how they manage their resources. This analysis will give us a clear picture of their financial health and business performance over the past few years. So are you ready to uncover the financial realities of Broadcom and Qualcomm? Stay tuned as we delve into the specifics. Let's start with the revenue of both companies. In the fiscal year of 2023, both Broadcom and Qualcomm reported total revenues of $36 billion. Looking back over the past 5 years, Broadcom has seen a compound annual growth rate, or CAGR, of 11% in their revenues, while Qualcomm experienced a slightly lower CAGR of 10%. Now let's delve a bit into how these revenues are structured. For Broadcom, a significant 78% of their revenue comes from their products, with the remaining 22% stemming from subscriptions and services. Qualcomm, on the other hand, has a more diverse revenue structure. 63% comes from handsets, 5% from automotive, 17% from the Internet of Things, and the remaining 15% from licensing. Geographically speaking, Broadcom's revenue distribution is 23% from the Americas, 67% from the Asia-Pacific, and 10% from Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Qualcomm's revenue, however, is more concentrated, with 62% coming from China, 13% from Vietnam, 9% from South Korea, 4% from the United States, and 12% from other foreign markets. It's worth noting that while both companies have seen steady growth, their revenue structures are quite different. These differences in revenue structure can impact the stability and predictability of future revenues, and are important factors to consider when comparing these two tech giants. Understanding these revenue dynamics is a crucial part of assessing the overall financial health and business strategies of Broadcom and Qualcomm. It's not just about how much money a company makes, but also where that money comes from, and how those sources of revenue might change over time. So, while Broadcom and Qualcomm may have had the same total revenue in 2023, the composition and growth of that revenue tell a more nuanced story. Both companies have seen steady growth, but their revenue structures are quite different. Now let's move on to their profitability. In the fiscal year of 2023, Broadcom boasted a gross profit margin of 69%, significantly higher than its 5-year average of 60%. This indicates a steady upward trend in the company's profitability over the past few years. On the other hand, Qualcomm's gross profit margin in the same fiscal year was 56%, slightly below its 5-year average of 58%, suggesting a gradual decline in profitability. Shifting our focus to net profit margins, Broadcom again outperformed with a net profit margin of 39% in 2023, a substantial increase from its 5-year average of 31%. Qualcomm, however, saw a net profit margin of 20%, which was slightly below its 5-year average of 23%. Let's put these numbers into perspective. Broadcom's gross profit margin is 13% higher than Qualcomm's, and its net profit margin is almost double. This suggests that Broadcom is not only generating more revenue, but is also more efficient at converting that revenue into profit. Broadcom's rising gross and net profit margins indicate a strong profitability trend. It is successfully enhancing its operational efficiency and cost management, thereby increasing its ability to generate profit from sales. On the contrary, Qualcomm's falling gross and net profit margins point to potential challenges in maintaining profitability. Despite generating significant revenue, it may be facing escalating costs or other operational inefficiencies that are eating into its profits. In terms of net profit in 2023, Broadcom outshines with $14.1 billion, while Qualcomm lags behind with $7.2 billion. Over the past 5 years, Broadcom's net profit has grown at a compound annual growth rate of 2.3%, while Qualcomm's has grown at a rate of 7.6%. Clearly, Broadcom has been more profitable in terms of gross and net profit margins. Let's look at the company's balance sheets next. Balance sheets offer a snapshot of a company's financial health at a specific point in time. we'll be focusing on the end of the fiscal year 2023. Broadcom's total assets tallied up to $73 billion, while Qualcomm sat at $51 billion. In terms of net assets, Broadcom had $24 billion, and Qualcomm had $22 billion. Net assets, also known as equity, represent the amount of money that would be returned to shareholders if all the company's assets were liquidated and all its debts paid off. Now, let's examine the equity to total assets ratio. This ratio provides insight into how much of a company's assets are financed by shareholders' equity. Broadcom's equity to total assets ratio was 33%, and Qualcomm's was 42%. A higher ratio can be a sign of financial stability, as it indicates that a company has more assets than liabilities. So, although Broadcom has a larger total asset base, Qualcomm appears to be better capitalized, with a higher proportion of its assets financed by equity. Next, let's delve into liquidity ratios. The current ratio, which compares a company's current assets to its current liabilities, gives us an idea of the company's ability to pay off its short-term obligations. Broadcom had a current ratio of 2.82, while Qualcomm's was 2.33. Both companies comfortably exceed the benchmark of 1, suggesting they have ample short-term assets to cover their short-term liabilities. The quick ratio is similar to the current ratio, but it excludes inventories from current assets, providing a stricter measure of a company's short-term liquidity. Broadcom's quick ratio was 2.56, and Qualcomm's was 1.67. Again, both companies demonstrate strong liquidity positions. It seems that both companies have healthy balance sheets, but Qualcomm has a higher equity to total assets ratio. Scene script: operational efficiency and cash flow are next on our list. Let's delve into the world of inventory days and receivable days. These are key indicators of how efficiently a company manages its operations. For the fiscal year 2023, Broadcom's inventory days were 63. This shows how quickly Broadcom turns its inventory into sales. On the other hand, Qualcomm's inventory days were a staggering 147. Broadcom appears to be more efficient in managing its inventory, turning it over more than twice as quickly as Qualcomm. Next, let's talk about receivable days. This determines the average number of days that a company takes to collect payment after a sale has been made. For Broadcom, the receivable days were 31, while Qualcomm's were 45. Once again, Broadcom seems to be more efficient, taking 2 weeks less on average to collect payment from its customers. Now let's pivot to cash flow, starting with operating cash flow. This measures the cash generated from a company's normal business operations. In 2023, Broadcom's operating cash flow was a solid $18 billion. Qualcomm, meanwhile, generated $11 billion. Both figures are impressive, reflecting strong cash generation capabilities. Free cash flow is another important indicator. It represents the cash a company generates after accounting for cash outflows to support operations and maintain its capital assets. Broadcom's free cash flow was $18 billion, mirroring its operating cash flow. Qualcomm's free cash flow was slightly less at $10 billion. These figures suggest that both companies have strong cash flows, which is a positive sign for investors. Lastly, let's look at the operating cash flow to net income ratio. This ratio indicates a company's ability to convert profit into cash. Broadcom's ratio was 1.3, while Qualcomm's was 1.6. This means Qualcomm was slightly more efficient at converting its profits into cash, despite Broadcom's superior performance in other areas of operational efficiency. Broadcom seems to manage its inventory and receivables better, but both companies have strong cash flows. Finally, let's analyze the company's return on equity. In fiscal year 2023, Broadcom's return on equity was 59%, with a net profit margin of 39%, an asset turnover of 0.49, and an asset-to-equity ratio of 3.04. On the other hand, Qualcomm's return on equity was 34%, its net profit margin 20%, asset turnover stood at 0.72, and the asset-to-equity ratio was 2.37. These figures highlight Broadcom's superior profitability and efficiency in utilizing its assets and equity. Despite lower asset turnover, Broadcom's higher net profit margin and asset-to-equity ratio contributed to a higher return on equity compared to Qualcomm. In conclusion, both Broadcom and Qualcomm are financially strong, but Broadcom has an edge in terms of profitability and operational efficiency. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to receive more new videos. Please comment on the businesses you want to analyze. We will compile and cover them in upcoming videos.